Welcome to the Netma Show, where we discuss news and current events and analyze how those things impact your everyday life. My name is Kellen, and 2019 has been off to a hot start. There has been so much news. So, for example, we've inducted probably the most diverse session of the House of Representatives ever. Nancy Pelosi regained her title of the Speaker of the House. We've got Apple slashing their revenue forecast based on their performance in China, and Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, extending an olive branch to perhaps have peace and partnership with the U.S. So yeah, it's been a packed week, and I think that I've managed to pick out a couple of things that are important for you to know going into week number 2. Let's start with a discussion on the U.S. economy. And you may have noticed that the stock market has been abysmal for the past 3 or 4 months. And that's because some investors may have been worried that a recession was more likely than not going to happen sooner rather than later. Well, that triggered them to sell off a bunch of their shares, which brought down the market. That did not make Donald Trump happy, and he started criticizing this guy named Jerome Powell. Well, Jerome Powell, he is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And if you remember, we discussed that the Federal Reserve has the power to influence the federal funds rate, which is the amount that banks charge each other to borrow money from each other. And this impacts you because it influences the interest rate on your credit card or the interest rate on your mortgage or your car payment. And Donald Trump was worried that if Jerome Powell messes up, that could trigger a recession, which is the last thing that Donald Trump would want going into the 2020 elections. I mean, if people don't have jobs, they may lose faith in him and his platform and vote for the other person, right? And so when Jerome Powell this week came out and said, hey, the economy is actually doing quite well, his statements were actually backed up with the U.S. jobs report, which proved that the U.S. added 312,000 jobs in the month of December 2018. And that's on top of the fact that we were only expecting an additional 180,000 jobs. And we learned that we added over 2 million jobs throughout all of 2018. And it only gets better from there because the people that have jobs, we learned that wages increased an average of 3.2%. And the unemployment rate is still manageable at 3.9%. And while it's up a little bit from what it had been, that's not a bad thing because that may suggest that more people are coming into the job market and are looking for employment rather than there just not being jobs available. And continuing on this tone about the government, if you didn't know, the government is still partially shut down. And this is all because of the debate between Donald Trump and the now democratically led House of Representatives. Donald Trump wants $5.6 billion in the new U.S. budget to fund the wall at the Mexican border that he ran on and continues to fight for. While the House of Representatives, they're saying, you ain't getting a dime from us. Donald Trump is saying that he's prepared to go the long haul by keeping the government shut down because they just can't come to an agreement. While he has also said that he may have the power to declare a state of emergency at the border, which would then allow him to bypass Congress to get the funds to build that wall. And this gets a little ironic because the shutdown government, it in fact affects departments such as, the department that runs the museums. You've got TSA officers, you've got the IRS, and the Coast Guard. Now, this is pretty ironic because one of the duties of the Coast Guard is to protect the mainland U.S. from drugs coming up from South America via water and into the country. And it's crazy because the wall is supposed to be built to defend the U.S. from immigration and the drugs that would come into the country. So now we aren't going to be able to pay the people that were doing that job, which is kind of crazy to me. And also, I mentioned that the IRS is impacted by this. That means that you still got to pay your taxes, but they may not pay you back in your refunds, which may tick off a ton of people throughout the country. And it's crazy because, people that are in wealthier tax brackets, they oftentimes set up their taxes to where they pay at the end of the year rather than collecting a check from the government at the end, which means that it more disproportionately impacts lower income people and families because they rely on those checks that come in the spring every year. And if they don't get it, that means that they aren't going to be able to, buy a new couch, go on a vacation, remodel their house, pay some bills. So yeah, there is a tremendous impact from that. And you may want to be aware of that. And TSA, some of those TSA officers aren't getting paid. Now, they're going to get paid whenever the government reopens, but for now, they ain't getting a check. And during week 1 of 2019, there was an increased number of those TSA officers calling in sick. Now, I can't actually blame them because I don't know if I'd go to work if I wasn't getting paid, and I probably wouldn't. So yeah, I feel like if I were them, I wouldn't go either. The thing is, you're probably going to experience higher wait times when you go to the airport, just as a heads up. And finally, our last story revolves around probably the most notorious drug lord of our generation, and that is El Chapo. And El Chapo ran the Sinaloa cartel down in Mexico, and he was arrested twice in Mexico, and guess how many times he escaped? Twice. So the third time being the charm, he was extradited to the U.S., where he is now facing charges for his criminal activity. He is in prison in New York City, and his trial is ongoing. But the interesting thing that happened this week is there was a witness that testified against him. That witness is a man named Vicente Zambada, which served as his logistics manager for a decade in the cartel. And now he's testifying against his boss. Now, Vicente, he took a plea deal. And in this plea deal, one thing that he had to give up was $1.3 billion to the U.S. government. And the crazy thing is, he's still going to be in jail. In fact, he took this plea deal to get his family out of Mexico and into the U.S. where they would be safer. But at the same time, he's also not going to be safe because you just snitched on a drug lord known for running a violent organization. So even though you're in jail in the US, I still think that there are plenty of bad things that can happen to that guy. So best of luck to him. Now, and his comments were pretty damning, not just to El Chapo, but also to corrupt politicians and business leaders in Mexico, because he testified that in 2008, he met with business leaders of the Mexican state-owned oil company, Pemex, where they discussed shipping 100 tons of cocaine in one of the company's oil tankers. Which, what? And the crazy thing about that, the irony of all these stories, is that that oil tanker, a ship, would have moved up through water to the continental U.S. And you know who would be responsible for stopping that? The Coast Guard, which is not being paid. So this week was full of news. I'm interested to hear what you've got to say. Drop me a comment down below, and until next time, peace.